Hello and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. This is a special Mount Rushmore podcast with probably my favorite musician of all time and a really, really great guy who's decided to do the Mount Rushmore of Bass Players. Please welcome to Mount Rushmore podcast, Mr. Matthew Sweet. How are you doing, Matthew?
Hello, I'm doing good, thanks. How are you?
Real good, thanks. So, Matthew, you chose to give us the Mount Rushmore of Bass Players. And one of the reasons you said was that you started off playing electric bass. Was that the first instrument you played?
It was not the first instrument. I played the recorder when, we got to that point in school where you could play an instrument. It was probably third grade or something. And then I learned to play the violin a little bit, sort of right before I got an electric bass. And, one day I was in a music store and I saw electric guitars and basses sort of hanging somewhere, and I thought those look really cool, like I want one of those,
Mm-hmm.
They just looked kind of space age to me, in a way that appealed to me. And so I did a bunch of extra chores or whatever and talked my parents into getting me this little bass and amp made by Univox at the time. And my first learning apparatus was this Carol K bass method book from probably like Mel Bay or whatever, the people that made sheet music.
Did you talk to Carol about that when you were recording in reverse?
Oh, yeah. I had her sign it for me. I still had my bass players, my how to play bass book by her. So I learned, the basic notes and kind of what they looked like on a scale. I could never really read super fluently, but I could figure out what written music was, and that was mostly from Carol's book. But I learned the basics of, what each note was and, how to play little runs and things. And so Carol K, I think I would put as one of the people on the Mount Rushmore. Plus, it's cool if a lady can be on there.
Oh, yeah.
She played on a lot of cool records over the years. She was really originally a guitar player, and in a way her bass playing in a lot of circumstances is very progressive. It's kind of really melodic and sort of changing, and I didn't think of her as being that kind of bass player until I sort of worked with her, and then I more understood how kind of melodic and fluent she was when set free. And I mostly knew her recorded from Brian Wilson Beach Boys sessions, Pet Sounds and things. And there she was playing very simple little things that, in a way, not as Carol-like, because Brian had the parts, very carefully figured out. But now, if I hear an old record on the radio or something, I hear Carol like kind of moving around and doing cool stuff, Yeah. So she'd be one I think I would put on the Rushmore.
And definitely from a role model standpoint as a first call guitarist, and then definitely a first call bassist and a member of the Wrecking Crew, and somebody who's called upon to actually contribute riffs and sometimes melody lines in a studio session where perhaps Sonny and Cher might not have the whole bit of that song figured out. Carol was also instrumental to bringing some of these very well-known pop songs to the fore. So that's a great pick.
Yeah, love her, Carol. Also a very colorful lady, very talkative. A little bit of what do I want to say? Intrigue about. Supposedly, there's things she claimed she played on that she didn't really play on.
Oh, really?
So there was always this little bit of a question on certain things. I think there was some arguments about Motown stuff I know they came to Los Angeles and recorded a lot of those records, and she claimed to have played bass on some that people said couldn't have been her, Yeah. But what we're talking about, we know she played on,
Yeah.
So there's Carol. She's up on the Rushmore. I'm going to then switch gears very much to Chris Squire.
Okay.
Chris Squire was the bass player in this group, Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very progressive rock group. And he had also a very melodic and kind of lead bass sort of style. He had a very interesting sound that was this more kind of grindy bass sound. And it was very easy for me to listen to Yes records and hear the bass and what the bass was playing, because it was kind of loud on those records. And so a lot of my early learning was learning all the Yes records on bass, which were these kind of impossibly challenging things, but I could pick them out by ear. I had sort of a musical ear for it.
Was Roundabout was one of those? Was like a Roundabout?
Roundabout was big on the radio when I was in about fifth to sixth grade on, rock radio. What do I want to call it? On FM radio, where it was not just hits. We called it, what's that realm of radio called?
Adult contemporary, or we're talking about
album rock.
Album rock, sure.
But it had a name. At any rate, they had various songs that would be on there. All Good People. But I bought those albums. I bought Fragile because it was the one I was hearing on the radio. One of their records I'm still quite fond of is Close to the Edge. Mm-hmm. It has some really cool musical moods on it and things that I really like. So Chris Squire, he would go up there, very innovative bass player, and he would be, at the top, first or second on, in Bass Player magazine, or
right.
Year after year, he would sort of be in either number one or number two. Another guy I thought of, and I thought he could sort of be, and with Chris Squire, I think of other bass players that could be superimposed in his place, that sort of got that sound. To me, sort of had a thing. There's Roy Wood from The Move. Mm-hmm. To me, really got that sort of sound. And he was working at the same time, a little bit before Yes, and when Yes was going to happen, and the same thing with ELO. So you hear that bass playing move like bass playing even on the first ELO record. It's kind of quite a bit like The Move. Mm-hmm. And that made me jump to, in fact, I went to Roy Wood because I thought of Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick,
right,
who also kind of can do that. And he added, he and Squire also both played 8-string basses. Tom played 12-string bass a lot. So they all kind of are in one category to me a little bit, even though they're from different genres of music.
Hey, Matthew, you were bringing up the fact that Chris Squire and his sound and had a very lead presence in some of the music, or a lot of the music, and brought the bass to the forefront. Bass is an interesting instrument because, like the guitar, it can take a melody, it can take a lead sometimes, but it often is part of this engine room of the song that, along with percussion, creates the feel of the song. Is that something, as a young person, that you enjoyed being part of? Or it sounds like you picked up the bass because it looked like a shiny alien.
Yeah, well, I did, and I asked the band teacher at my grade school, which one should I get, the one with 4 strings or the one with 6 strings? So I didn't know much what I was getting into when I got a bass, but then as I learned how to play it, that became a favorite thing for me, is listening to a record and figuring out the bass parts off of it. And I did it with lots of different kinds of records. But I did, my very early training was a lot of Yes records. And then I thought I'd pull another guy who was sort of a giant of the bass world at the time I was a young kid, and from a totally different sort of jazz fusion background, Stanley Clarke.
Oh yeah, great.
I really was enamored of his playing, and I did learn how to play like those. You know, he would bang his thumb and then pop things, pluck things. You know, and I did learn to play quite a few of those Stanley Clarke songs. My older brother Mike had his records, and so I was like, wow, that's really, you know, about the bass, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's a guy who maybe everybody talks about him. I don't really know in the realm of bass players now, but he was really a giant. He was the one who would be either number one or number two against Chris Squire, you know, at the time. He was just sort of thought of as a very accomplished bass player. Now, as I got to writing songs, so Stanley Clarke, I think, deserves to be there because he was just a very influential and a total unique talent. You know, his thing was very much his thing. Now, what I was going to say is, as I got into songwriting more, I saw the function of bass as a basic thing, you know, more than what I'd kind of grown up on. Of course, once I was in junior high, then it was the British new wave kind of invasion. And I got into, you know, a lot of things that were simpler of kind of a new wave time, you know, like the Buzzcocks or whatever had very simple sort of bass lines compared to those guys. But even then, you can find people, the bass player in the Attractions was very melodic and interesting. Oh, yeah. But service of the song for the bass, it became kind of clearer to me once I was making my own songs. And the guy, my last guy for Mount Rushmore is Paul McCartney.
I was wondering if he was going to come into the list. Sure,
I'm going to get to McCartney.
Yeah.
And his music was such a driving force. I mean, his bass playing was such a driving force in the Beatles early on. And he, you know, did a lot of interesting things with the bass, but still served the songs like really well, you know?
Yeah.
So McCartney's bass playing, I think, was such an interesting amalgam of the styles he'd grown up on, you know?
Yeah.
And then he made the style of his own, you know, with so much cool bass playing on Beatles records. But, and I really got into him when I was a little bit older, sort of when I first went to college. And then, you know, I guess it was really even a little later after I was in Athens, I traded some guitar I had for a Hofner bass.
Oh, right.
And then I really focused in on that kind of picked Hofner kind of, it has almost a clicky kind of thing about it. That's on some McCartney stuff kind of has that sound.
He was unique because he would play often in 4/4. He'd be playing six notes, or be playing 8 notes in something that was straight time. So
yeah, he had a very groovy feel about things, and he, you know, and a lot of people were influenced by his bass playing.
Right.
So many people, including myself, even though it was a little later. I didn't, for some reason, I didn't really play bass with Beatles records much until I was older. And it maybe wasn't so much playing with them as listening to them and go, wow, that bass sounds so cool to me, you know.
Right.
But I really hear Paul's bass playing when I hear Beatles songs. And and it's so vital. So I love the bass, and I do like really melodic bass players, but I sometimes keep it really simple. I kind of just go with whatever I feel like when I play bass.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly would not put myself on Rushmore.
Oh, come on. Well, I would say that you're that. I'm an unabashed Matthew Sweet fan, and you're right there on the Rushmore for me. And you have remained so for almost 30 years now.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you. I'm very flattered.
I would also say that one thing that Sir Paul McCartney kind of teaches us is if you could be in a studio and you could have your entire band go on the run, and you can finish the album yourself if you're a versatile musician like he of course is, and it seems like a very welcome place for you to be right now, to be in the studio, not just doing demos but doing the whole album with your guest players and things like that. Is somebody like Paul who can at least get by in all the different roles as a musician on these songs. He's somewhat of a role model, if not from a compositional standpoint, in a production standpoint, in that he can hear the whole song and then
kind of do it on his own. Yeah. And guys I really love, like Brian Wilson, was kind of that way. Although he used other musicians so much, he could really do it kind of without the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And since I'm a solo artist, that's kind of the way I learned writing songs, was recording myself. So I learned how to get by on a lot of things when I was, kind of privately writing my first stuff. I got a 4-track cassette recorder. I worked at a music store and, got to hear what it was like to, play a bass and then play some guitar and then sing on it, or whatever order, I did it in. And so, Paul's amazing that way. And I really liked his first solo record a lot because it has that feel of being a songwriter doing all the playing.
Right. I don't want to take up the rest of your day, but I do appreciate you taking time to talk with us. And I'd love to ask you to share out with our audience where they can find you out online, where they can find you out on tour, where they can connect with Matthew Sweet.
Well, there's MatthewSweet.com. I can't promise how up to date it is, but hopefully it has some up-to-date stuff. I don't really go and deal with it much. My management keeps our Facebook going pretty strongly, so new things you can learn about easily through Facebook. And just searching online, I imagine you can also find tour dates if you don't happen to follow them on Facebook. We tour quite a bit, usually more toward the summer months. I just went to Spain and England in December and did a bunch of shows. I've toured really a lot since Tomorrow Forever came out. Excuse me. And we've done, West Coast every year. So we do get around the States a lot. We have a great time doing shows, and everybody that comes, they're really diehard fans. So it's, kind of always a good experience, no matter what else is going on,
Yeah.
So I think you can hear my voice is kind of going out today. Sometimes my voice doesn't hold up all the time, but even then we have a great time. So not to say something negative about coming to see me play live. I only mean today I'm kind of hoarse.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us. It's great to have you on the Mount Rushmore podcast. And I'm going to encourage all of our listeners to see you out on the road and to go to the different outlets to get your albums. So it's been a delight to have you here. And we'll wrap things up with the Mount Rushmore of Bass Players with our special guest, my favorite musician, Matthew Sweet.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.